I grew up in a house with a wet basement. Maybe some of you know what that's like. It's not easy. I think our most prized possession was probably the sump pump. If there was a storm, we lived in fear of the power going out, because that sump pump was the only thing that was protecting our furnace and our washer and dryer and our pictures that we had drawn from mommy and daddy when we were little. That was the only thing saving those things, because the water would rise up from our wet basement and we would have to bail all day and all night. If the power went out, we had to grab buckets and we had to get a bucket full of water one at a time, and we had to go up the basement stairs and through the kitchen and through the family room and out the mudroom and then dump the water somewhere in the backyard, sometimes on a pile of snow. It was often the winter. And we knew full well that it was just going to seep down and go back to the basement again. When the power would go out, we were sunk. But even if it didn't, we lived in fear of how hard the sump pump was working. Dad had a spiral little notebook, and he would take notes. Went on at this time, went off at this time, only rested for 5 minutes. Then he would watch as the water would gush in more. This time it only rested for 30 seconds. And then we would reach a point sometimes when it didn't go off at all. It was just always running. And that is so bad for a motor. We would get fans and put them on the motor so it would try to stay cool. But a motor should not run without a brake. And that is true for a lot of things, which is why God gave us limits. God gave us guidelines for placing limits on things so that we don't overdo a good thing. For example, God said, you should not work 7 days a week. Even God didn't do that. That's called workaholism. That's a form of addiction. Don't do that, God said. God said, work 6 days a week and save 1 day for rest and prayer and focusing on what matters most. That day should be set aside, because working to your maximum ability all the time is not good for motors, and it's not good for people. God also said to farmers, don't work the land mercilessly. Every 20 years or so, you've got to take a year off so that the land doesn't get exhausted. You've got to let it lay fallow, and its only job for that year is to rest so that it can regain the nutrition of the soil and again provide good crops. Because working to maximum ability all the time is not good for the land, and it's not good for people. God also said, don't use all of your income on your budget. That doesn't give you enough margin. You have to save 20% of your income for other things. God said 10% of your income should go to the temple, and another 10% should go to the poor. You have to live on 80% of your income, not 100%, because taking your budget to its absolute limit is not good. There have to be guidelines that give limits and boundaries to things. So that's what we're hearing about today. Jesus is teaching his disciples about limits. And the first one is, don't work 7 days a week. Take a day and give it to God, and God will give you rest and peace. When I was a seminarian the way Alessio is now, I was told by my vocation director that we should do what the monks do and divide our day into 3 parts. 8 hours for sleeping, 8 hours for working, and 8 hours for praying and resting and pursuing hobbies. That's a balanced life, he said. So what's interesting is, in the middle of this story, just as Jesus is teaching about limits, he starts working again. The people say, Jesus, can you help us? And he goes, okay, here I am, I'm with you. why would he go back on what he just taught? Why didn't he tell them, nope, not today? What is it that he's trying to teach us about limits with this story? Well, the thing we know is he's not telling us to be workaholics. There's no way Jesus is saying, yep, pretend you're God and just be everything to everyone all the time. There's no way that that's what we're being told. He's not teaching them to not take breaks from working. He's teaching them to never take a break from compassion. We don't get vacations from compassion. We have to be compassionate all the time, no matter where we are. If we come across someone suffering, we don't tell them, sorry, it's a weekend, I can't help you. We don't need a break from compassion. From responding to emails? Absolutely. From coming to our desk? Yes. But from compassion? No breaks. No days off. And when we're tired, we can sense that we want to take a break from everything. And sometimes compassion is one of the first things to go. I was having a conversation with a wise friend a few years ago when I was going through a really tired phase. I was feeling particularly burned out. And I said to this friend, how the heck does Pope Francis do it? And she said, what do you mean? I said, I don't understand. Anywhere he goes, people grab at him. You know, he comes out on a balcony and they scream. He walks through a crowd and they're trying to touch him. They're thrusting their babies at him. They're coming at him in wheelchairs and every other mode. How does he do it? How does he allow himself to be so present all the time to people? How does he come up with the right thing to say, the right thing to do? How does he do it? And she said, it's not coming from him. It's coming from God. He doesn't try to do it. He just makes himself available for God to do it. He doesn't have to think of what to say. He just lets God speak through him. And that's what Jesus is teaching his disciples today, and us, is that we need to take a page out of that book. People who are able to do that do what the Pope does. And maybe a good way to think of it is they know that they're like transistor radios. A radio is not producing the programming. There's not a little production team inside the radio coming up with the interviews and the programs and the music. The radio is just tuned in. It's tuned in, and it's at the right frequency. And then the message comes across without any effort from the radio. The radio looks like it's giving you something, but it's actually receiving. We call it a radio receiver, not a giver. The production is coming from beyond, and the radio just gives it, receives what it has, and then passes it along. It doesn't have to make it up itself. Just like the broadcast on a radio is not coming from inside the machine, what the Pope is saying is not coming from his ideas. He's making himself available, just like we're supposed to. So we've got to consider this for ourselves. Are we receivers? Can we receive from God and then just pass it along rather than thinking we have to be givers and then fall into that martyr thing where we're like, oh my gosh, not again. Rolling our eyes at how many demands are on our time and how only I can do it. Sometimes it's natural to fall into that, and everyone can have compassion about how hard that can be. If you're like a parent of young children and there's no breaks, if you're in the middle of a really hard time in your finances or your career, you're a CPA and it's the first week of April, we get it. But we can't live like that all the time. It's not good for motors and it's not good for us. So we need to understand that although we have to take breaks, we don't have to ever take a break from compassion, because compassion is not like pizza. We don't have to save slices for the worst things that are coming down the road. The more we give it, the more we have it. We don't have to save it. We don't have to hold back. And we don't have to feel exhausted when we offer compassion, because it's not coming from us. It's just a feeling of caring that we receive from God and pass along. So this week, the question is, what is the part of this wisdom that is meant for me and for you? What are we supposed to hear from this? Is it maybe going back to the basics? Are we someone who needs to take the Sabbath? We just haven't done it. We're on our phone all Sabbath, answering work emails, not resting, not paying attention to what matters. Is that what we need to do? Is it something else? Have we fallen into kind of like a over-functioning mode where we're a martyr for other people and we're always feeling overwhelmed and everyone comes to me for everything? Is there a chance that we're trying to produce instead of just receive and pass on? Can we let go of thinking we have to do all of this by ourselves? My parents live in the same house that I grew up in to this day, and they still have a wet basement. But they're in their 80s now, so there's no going up and down the stairs to bail water all night long. We gave that up years ago because we got a generator. And now when the power goes out, we don't try to fix the problem ourselves. We get power from beyond, and it does the job for us. And then we don't have to think it all depends on us to save the furnace and the washer and dryer. The generator does it for us. And that power allows a sump pump to work without failing. And that's how we can, too.